Good evening and welcome to tonight's panel on Trayvon Martin and the fight against the new Jim Crow. As I'm sure most of you have heard, George Zimmerman, the man who killed Trayvon Martin, has finally been charged with second-degree murder. And he's said to be in custody in someplace in Florida, and will now finally be brought to trial. They won't say where exactly he is, but we're to believe that he is. This is an important development in the case of Trayvon Martin. It shows, I think, how important mass demonstrations and mass protests are. I mean, we've got to remember how this started. This is 44 days since Trayvon Martin was killed. And this is being held up by the special prosecutor as evidence that the system works. But it took tens of thousands of people protesting in cities across this country for the last several weeks for there to be so much as a charge brought against Trayvon Martin. And this panel here tonight is about how that system doesn't work and the multiple ways and the many people that are failed by that system. This is not, the significance of the Trayvon Martin case is not as of somebody who is exceptional, but as of somebody who is typical, as of an example of something that happens all the time. In 2012 alone, 29 African Americans have been killed by police officers, security guards, and people like George Zimmerman who are associated with the police. Trayvon Martin is just one of them. A couple of the other of them lived in Chicago. Stephon Watts, who was killed on February 1st, and Rekia Boyd, who was killed 3 weeks ago tonight. This panel was to begin with a call-in from Benjamin Crump, Trayvon Martin's family's lawyer. Understandably, they're tied up right now. We're going to proceed. If they do call in, then we'll take the call whenever that does come in. But our plan is to go forward with the rest of the program. So I'd like to introduce the rest of the panelists here tonight. First, in no particular order, but in the order that they'll be speaking, very particular order. From Operation Push, I'd like to introduce Bishop Grant, who's the field director. There he is, for Operation Push. Simeon Wright, the cousin of Emmett Till, the son of Mose Wright, and the author of Simeon's Story, an eyewitness account to the kidnapping of Emmett Till. Stephen Watts, the father of Stephon Watts. Martina Sutton, the brother of Rekia Boyd. And Elisa Love from the Howard Morgan, the program for Howard Morgan's Justice. Finally, Kianga Yamada Taylor, an activist with the International Socialist Organization. We were going to have Benjamin Crump lead off today and couldn't, but we are, I'm happy to say, able to have an unexpected surprise. Dr. John Carlos, the 1968 Olympian who's famous for having held up the Black Power fist at the Olympics, found out about the meeting tonight here in Chicago and sent in a message of solidarity, which I'd like to begin by reading. Dr. John Carlos says, "I support tonight's event with all my heart. Why? Because I support justice for Trayvon Martin with all my heart. Back in 1968, when Tommy Smith and I raised our fists at the medal platform at the Olympics, we knew that we would catch hell, but we didn't care. We didn't care because we were doing it for our children and our children's children. We did it because we wanted the coming generations to live and breathe in this country as full citizens with equal rights and to be able to achieve their God-given potential. We were not fighting for a world where a young man with his whole life laid out in front of him would find himself dead on the ground for the crime of living while black. What happened to Trayvon, what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and what happens in many other places and with many other cases we never hear anything about, is to me simply proof that the fight didn't end in 1968. It's still going on, and it will continue to keep going on until all people of all colors are free to live without fear of violence from their oppressors. I am Trayvon Martin, just like I am Troy Davis. Just like I am every last person who this society deems to be something less than human because of the way God made us. This country has been playing that game for way too long. It's a game that won't end with Trayvon Martin, but it can be a beginning of the end if we're willing to fight and make it so. With that, I'd like to invite Simeon Wright.
Thank you, Anton. Thank you all for inviting me here tonight to speak about what has taken place in Florida. I like to liken racism to the water moccasin. Once you've been bitten by the water moccasin, you know it when you see it. I know racism when I see it. In Florida, they're trying to say racism had nothing to do with it. Here's a young man walking down the street on his way home. White man following him. And the man said that he killed him because he was protecting his space. That's what he said. Isn't that amazing? You're stalking a man, overtakes him, encroaches upon his space, and then you kill him. And the police said, and the prosecutor, not guilty. Reminds me of what happened in 1955 down in Money, Mississippi. My cousin, all he did was whistle. For that, he was killed. But I have to give it to the Sheriff Department of Leaflore County. They did arrest these men, charged them with kidnapping. Later on, they charged them with murder. But that's not all. We went to the trial. My daddy testified, put his life on the line and the life of his 3 sons. He knew that if he testified against these men, more than likely, he would be killed. But this is what he said. He said, a man has to do what a man has to do. He told one man, he said, I know one thing. I know I'm going to testify. Whether I live, I don't know. We all know the verdict. The killing was something. But it was something about that verdict that turned the stomach of every man, woman in America, except the segregationists. They just couldn't understand it. I was just 12. I knew we had a verdict of guilty. If you ask me tonight what's going to happen to the man that killed Trayvon Martin, I would say to you, if I was 12 years old again, I would say he would be convicted. But I'm not 12. I'm flirting with 70. And I know what a water moccasin would do to you. If you fill the jury with all water moccasins, I can tell you the verdict. The verdict would be not guilty. Because that's something about a water moccasin. He doesn't change. He doesn't run. And he dare you to get close to him. That's where we are. It just confirmed when I tell young black men everywhere I go. I said, we're not living under Jim Crow now, but we're living under the son of Jim Crow. He said, what does that mean? I said, we don't have equal protection under the law. I like to say something to Chicago. I know there ain't no policemen in here. I don't care if you're in here or not. I've been in Chicago, it'll be 57 years come this September. I've never heard tell of a policeman shooting a white boy. I've never heard of it. Have you? It's not going to happen. The water moccasin is here. It's just not in your face like it was in 55. Where I come from, it's in your face, and we dare you to do something about it. But thankful for people like you. You demonstrated in the street. We almost had the same thing in Florida. They almost got away with it. But because of the demonstration, because of you saying, I will not take it anymore, charges were brought against this man. Now let's wait and see what the verdict will be. Will it be guilty? Will it be not guilty? If the water moccasins is on the trial, on the jury, I can tell you what the verdict would be. Hopefully, we have killed most of them with the laws of the land. Hopefully. The parallels are similar. Now it's up to we the people. What will we the people say? I heard one lady, I was on the radio station in Chicago about the Emmett Till case. Then I'm finished. She said God was in the verdict. That's what she said. Now I don't have to tell you that she was a water moccasin. God was in the verdict. I grabbed the mic and I screamed in the radio. I said, God wasn't on that jury. It was we the people, Anglo-Saxons. They rendered the verdict. The men that killed Emmett Till never paid for it. But the state of Mississippi is still paying for the murder of Emmett Till. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Bishop Tavis Grant from Operation Push.
It is with great sobriety tonight that we approach the charge and the arrest of Mr. Zimmerman some 45 days after the murder of Trayvon Martin. And we have to temper it with a great deal of apprehension to ensure that we don't lose sight of the Trayvon Martins here in Chicago. We've just listened to a tape recording of Darren Hanna in North Chicago, who is pleading for his life as officers tased him and killed him. We have sitting here tonight Stephen Watts, the father of Stephon Watts, whose family called the police because there were no mental health professionals available. They didn't call the police to kill their child or even arrest their child, but to help their child. And these officers killed Stephon in the presence of his father and in the confines of his home. Or whether it is Howard Morgan, who was a veteran police officer identified himself as such. 4 white rookie officers shot him 28 times, never spending a night in the hospital. He spent 9 months chained to his bed. Bullets are still in his body, and he sits at 26 in California waiting to be shipped to Statesville to serve a 40-year sentence. Our disgust with what happened to Trayvon should be the same as 3 African Americans who were gunned down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, by 2 white individuals who purposely went into the African American community to kill African Americans. And the question is that a hate crime? Who would make such a statement? It is just as much a hate crime as defacing a temple or a mosque. What we have proven again is that marching makes a difference. What we've proven again is when we rise above our differences and use our diversity in creative measure and go beyond gender and say enough is enough, we can bring a person to justice after 45 days. And no matter how long it takes, we have to continue to march, whether it's here in Chicago, whether it's in Tulsa, Oklahoma, whether it's in North Chicago. We've got to say enough is enough. And we've got to raise the value of life, that it doesn't have to be a matter of race, but the human race is a race too. And we have to be as outraged tomorrow night and the next day, until we get a system that works for everybody. And so on behalf of Reverend Jesse Jackson and Rainbow Push, we are encouraged tonight, but we're sober. There's no time for celebration. This is a time for observation. We have to watch. I think we're in the grace place. We have to watch as well as pray. Because until Stephon Watts, till Howard Morgan, Darren Hanna, Rekia Boyd, who was murdered, a young, beautiful African American. Some of you would never be to Sanford, but you could leave here and ride right down to Lawndale and drive past where she laid in the street without medical attention. Go by the hospital, Mount Sinai, where she laid in the emergency room for 6 hours. Not because they couldn't care for her, they refused to care for her. And by the time they gave her the appropriate medical attention, it was too late. Somebody in here still has to be outraged. I'm going to say it again. Somebody in here still has to be outraged. I said somebody in here has to still be outraged. Somebody in here still has to be outraged. Stephon Watts was not just an African American child, he was a child with autism. He was a child who needed services. It's a child who needed programs. And they weren't afforded that. Some 10 opportunities to help this child and his family. And officers showed up with tasers and weapons pulled and murdered him. His father is here battling stomach cancer. Somebody ought to be outraged tonight for this family. So our prayers are with the father and mother of Trayvon. Maybe they can rest a little bit. But after we rest, we've got to hit the streets. I said after we rest, we have to hit the streets. I said after we rest, we have to hit the streets. And we can't just march. Reverend Jeanette Wilson is going to talk to us tonight about public policy. Because even tonight, it is legal in Florida for another Zimmerman. You didn't hear what I said. He's arrested, but it's still a law on the book that says you have the right to stand your ground. Well, tonight in Chicago, we have the moral right to stand our ground and say enough is enough. Thank you.
I want to thank Bishop Grant for giving us the moral imperative and the moral call to action. As we have already heard, this Trayvon case has now moved appropriately from no arrest and no charges to a charge of second-degree murder and an arrest of what we believe is the one who caused the murder. He has admitted to shooting Trayvon. The issue now is whether or not he has an affirmative defense. The prosecutor has approved charges of second-degree murder, which means the maximum penalty he could receive is that of life in prison. But we have to move beyond the Zimmerman matter and look at how it is we can pressure for the appropriate public policy positions so that we do not continue to witness Trayvon Martins around the country. One is the Stand Your Ground laws that are now in 25 states around this nation. And so the question we must begin to ask our state elected officials who say they are progressive, who say they represent our best interests, how is it Stand Your Ground exists in Florida? They tried to introduce it in Illinois. How is it that we are allowing state legislators that we vote for, that we allow to go to houses in Springfield, Illinois, in Wisconsin, in several of the southern states, to have these stand your ground, self-defense laws that create this kind of vigilante justice that killed young Trayvon. And so we're saying that every one of us now must move from marching to get Zimmerman arrested because now he's arrested, to get Zimmerman charged, now he's charged. Let's now move to get the laws in 25 stand your ground states removed off of the books so that we don't have another situation where we have to wonder, will he have a defense? Whether or not the judge now is going to allow his affirmative defense to cause him to not be incarcerated for any length of time. Whether or not this criminal justice system in the state of Florida will allow him to be tried, and that's up to the defense and to a judge to decide whether or not Zimmerman, in fact, will have a jury trial or a bench trial. Which do you think would be fair? And so this stand your ground legislation has far-reaching implications for this case and other cases like it. We cannot rest. We must now move to looking at all state legislators, state senators, and general assemblies across this nation are up for re-election in 2012. We must vote. Young America must not only put a hood on, put your hood on and go vote in the polls in November and vote people out of office that voted for these laws, voter suppression laws in 27 the same states. They voted for stand your ground laws in 25 states. They have voted for these oppressive states' rights legislation. We've got to change the public policy. Secondly, as Bishop has already mentioned, our public educational systems are now suspending and expelling students like Trayvon. Trayvon was suspended in the first place. It is these kinds of zero tolerance policies that exist in public schools across America that result in a Trayvon being on the street and Pookie being on the street in Chicago. Our young boys and girls are on the street committing crimes and being victimized by criminal activity while suspended. So we must change the zero tolerance policies that exist in Chicago, which has the third highest school suspension rate of any other major city other than New York and Los Angeles. We can't just put a hoodie on and stand for Trayvon. We must put off our hoodies and go to these board meetings and challenge these zero tolerance policies that move our children from inside the public schools to outside on the street where crime continues to occur. And then finally, our public policy positions must also have a moral and ethical high ground. This murder she writes, or murder they write, on the streets of Chicago, it's a bloodbath in our city, and it has not yet reached consistent warm temperatures like we will experience in the summer. We must demand that our children who are now growing up in situations of post-traumatic stress like a war zone, that they get the adequate grief counseling and interventions in public schools and in our communities so that they can deal with life in a different way. Our public policy positions and our ethical, moral high ground must transform America to be the America that it once was and the America that God would have it to be. As we are in Grace Place, we're looking for grace not just for Trayvon's family and people like him. We're looking for grace and mercy and justice and righteousness for every child who could be Trayvon if the circumstances were the same, and if the laws remain. There will be more Trayvons. Unless we remain vigilant, we not only watch as well as pray, we must also march ourselves to the polls. We're going to have to vote like we've never voted before, and we're going to have to remove people from state and federal offices that refuse to deal with our interests. One final thing. We will be calling for a renewal of enforcement by the United States Civil Rights Commission to define and redefine hate crimes. They should not be wondering in Tulsa, whether or not it's a hate crime. Clearly it is, but we must make that clear on the books. We are asking for a renewal of the Kerner Commission report. This racism that is in America that continues to beset African Americans and people of color must be addressed and dealt with forthrightly. And finally, we're calling on the U.S. Department of Justice to increase its investigation and enforcement of civil rights and human rights laws in America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Wilson. As has come up a couple of times before, this is a forum that's not just about Trayvon Martin, but about the Trayvon Martins, as they've been called, of Chicago. I think it's important that at least, Channel 9 is still here. It hasn't left already. Because one thing that's important about this, and I would like to encourage them to stay for the whole evening. Because what's important about this is for the people of Chicago, is what we do here in Chicago. And we want to come and have a discussion about it, but we also want to bring out of this meeting the beginnings of a movement here in Chicago around the cases here in Chicago. And 3 of the very most important cases are represented on this panel, and that's the purpose. We're going to be sending around sign-up sheets after this panel or during this panel for people who want to get involved in organizing around these cases in Chicago. And I encourage all of you to sign up and get involved in this, because the only way that charges were brought against George Zimmerman was because people were in the streets. And if we want charges brought against the killer of Rekia Boyd and the killer of Stephon Watts, we're going to have to get out in the streets in this city. With that, I'd like to welcome Martina Sutton.
How y'all doing? For those of you who doesn't know, I'm the brother of Rekia Boyd. For people that didn't hear the story, she was out enjoying herself in Douglas Park. It was an unusual hot winter day, about 74 degrees. And so she was enjoying some of the weather. She had to go and use the washroom, so a friend of hers let her use the washroom, and as she came out, a little crowd got confronted by an off-duty officer, Detective Dante Servine. Detective Dante Servine. And had words with one of the young men from the inside of his car. Nobody knew that he was an officer. Nobody didn't know who he was. He was non-African American around the neighborhood at 1 o'clock in the morning. I mean, the first thing somebody's gonna think is, he's coming to buy drugs. Words went back and forth for a second. Before everybody knew it, a gun was displayed outside the driver's side of the window. And anywhere from 10 to 18 shots rang out. Now, this officer claimed that he was scared. He feared for his life. But 10 to 18 shots don't sound like no fear to me. It sounds like you out hunting. You shooting to kill. And none of the shots, there was 2 people shot that night. Mr. Cross was shot in the hand. And the way that he was shot, that the bullet entered, it was more of a defensive wound, trying to shield his face. And another bullet hit my sister in the head. She laid there for close to 30 minutes before she received any help. The ambulance couldn't get through. They had to roll a gurney almost a block just to come and get her. Hospital a mere 4 blocks away. When she got to the hospital, nobody touched her for 6 hours. 6 hours. She laid there with a bullet in her head, clinging on to life. Once surgeon finally had the courage to touch her, because she was young, vitals were still strong, and she seen that, she hadn't given up on life. And so she took the chance until her brain swelled, and of course she had to stop. Now, my sister got shot around 1 o'clock in the morning. My sister stayed with me. I wasn't notified till 10:30 in the morning. I'm looking at the news, praying for a family of a 22-year-old girl that got shot in the head. I'm sending my prayers out to this family and said, nobody can't even enjoy themselves no more. Come to find out, when they knocked on my door, I'm the family that I'm praying for. My little sister, she wasn't found with no drugs on her. She wasn't found with any weapon. Nobody in the crowd had a weapon. Nobody displayed a gun. But according to Dante Servine, somebody showed one. But Police was on the scene less than 30 seconds. Where did the gun go? So when the detectives knocked on my door, they asked for me by name. Are you Martinez Sutton? I said, yes. What's the problem? They said, are you the brother of Rekia Boyd? I said, yes. What's going on? Well, she's been involved in a crime. A crime. And my eyebrows went up. I said, what did she do? Where is she? I'm concerned. Well, she's been shot in the head. She's laying in the hospital in critical condition. That's all the information we have. This is where you can find her at, and this is the number you can call around and find out what's going on. Sorry. I walked away. Last contact I had with the police. Nobody called and offered the family condolences. We didn't even get a Hallmark card, a card at the funeral, or anything. I miss my sister. I miss her coming upstairs, sitting in my chair for about 30 minutes, talking to me about improving her life, talking to me about her ambitions, her goals. And the most crazy thing is, on the day that I planned her funeral was the day she's supposed to moved on down to Bloomington and start her life anew. Now, she can't do that. Why? She's 6 feet in the ground, not able to move, not able to talk for herself, defend herself or anything. Why this monster is still on the streets, working for this department, and talking about we're investigating. What needs to be investigated? Nobody did anything wrong that night. Nobody. And one of the most craziest things is, what my sister laid near an alley is right behind the officer's house. I guess nobody told y'all that. Right behind his house. He came down a one-way street the wrong way in his personal vehicle. Could have been intoxicated. We're not 100% sure yet because nobody told us nothing. We just looking for answers. And these tears on my face, they're not tears of defeat. They're not. I'm not going to stop. It's tears of determination.
Yes, sir.
It's tears of anger. They just trying to sweep this under the rug. I want y'all to know the rug has just been lifted off the floor. We're going to keep pushing for this until I get justice for my sister. Thank y'all.
I'd now like to welcome Stephen Watts, father of Stephon Watts.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. On February 1st, my life changed. My baby was taken from me. He was murdered by Calumet City police officers. It hurts so bad to talk about it that I'm going to introduce my brother and let him explain it to you. because I'm in a lot of pain. I've seen 4 therapists, 3 psychiatrists. I can't sleep at night. I have to take pills. My baby is gone. He's 6 feet under and he's not coming back. And there's nothing I can do about it. So, Wayne Watts, if you'd like to come up here.
Thanks, Steve.
We'd like to thank everybody out here for inviting us out here this evening. We as the Watts family stand in agreement with all the families here, Trayvon Martin, Rekia Boyd, Howard Morgan. But we also would need your help. We want justice. We want justice. We want justice, and we want justice now. These 2 police officers that came in my brother's house and shot and murdered my nephew could be walking around talking to anybody. We don't even know their names. I've called and I've called and I've called. No one will not give us any information. Nothing. It's just a blank out to what's going on. This pain is horrendous. This pain is unimaginable. I'm sitting there listening to the stories and I can feel all this pain just going down to my toes because it's horrendous. They shot and murdered my nephew in front of his father. We all as parents have this fear that one day somebody's going to come knocking on your door, right? We have this fear as a parent. I'm worrying about my child. Where are they? Oh God, I can't find them. Have you seen them? Because we're worrying about something's going to happen. But can you imagine to see your baby life taken in front of you? His last breath, you see it. My brother has been suffering immensely. He blames himself constantly, over and over again. I said, Stephen, you did not let these people come to your house to murder your child. He told me when they came in there, he told them it was all right. I have things in order. They said, no, we have to see Stephon. And then he did not tell you that he did not call 911 because there's no tape, because he did not call 911. He called 9-emergency because this is what we're afraid of, because he's a young black child, just made 15 years old and had autism. And you're talking about the police. My sister-in-law, we went up to the police station and she was screaming and hollering, you killed my baby, you killed my baby. The officer told her, have a nice day. She screamed out, what do you mean, have a nice day? You killed my child. And he's standing there and he just smirked and smiled. Then that day, they had a police press conference. And the police chief said, we've been to the house 9 and 10 times, but Stephon crossed the line this time. He crossed the line. Autistic child. What line do he understand in his head?
Did not cross the line.
What line did he cross? I don't understand lines. What do you mean? And these officers are supposed to be trained for this. So this pain is immense. I keep going over in my head, what could I have done to save this baby? Could I said another word? Should I did this? Should I did this? And my brother is going through monumental pain. We're trying to go to church. We're trying to see psychiatrists. And every day I have to hear him say, it's my fault. It's my fault. I said, Stephen, it's not your fault. It's my fault. I killed my baby. I killed my baby. And so we need you guys help because we want justice for Stephon Watts. I want justice. So I'm asking you guys to please sign this petition for us so we can get justice. They will not give us no information. They won't give us anything. So I'm asking for help. Matter of fact, for my baby, I'm begging for it. We need help to hold him up so I can keep him standing up so he can keep on fighting for his baby. They were best friends. He was getting him ready for school. They were best friends. He keeps telling me, he said, bro, I don't know what I'm going to do. My best friend is gone. He's gone. He's in that ground with that box over his head. This stuff has got to stop. And it's got to stop now. So I made this promise to my little brother. My health is not in the greatest shape. But I told him, until my dying breath, we will fight for your child. We will fight. I will turn over every rock, every stone of what I got to do. But I want justice. I'm not talking about no money. You cannot replace that baby. No amount of money can replace that child, not to see his face, not to see his children, not to see his marriage. None of that is all gone. We had dreams for Stephon. We talked about what he's going to do when he grows up because he loves computers. So he said he's going to be a computer repairman. He's going to buy his own house. None of that will happen anymore. None of that. So he's suffering now. So I'm standing up here to try to be his rock. And I will continue being your rock, brother. Because, like I said, I don't know when this time is going to come and he starts blaming himself because you have good time. Mr. Martin and his wife said today, I was listening to him, they said, you have good times, you have bad times, and that's what he has. For a minute, he'll smile, and the next minute I'll look at him and he's withdrawn, he's gone. So we are asking for your help to please sign these petitions for us, because we are trying to get justice, and we got to stop this, and we got to stop this now. This is 2012. This will never happen again. Stop it now. Justice for these families. Justice for these families. Justice for these families. We want justice, and we want justice now.
The only way that's going to happen is if we in Chicago do something about it, and we need to start doing something about it now. So on April 26th, we're calling for a march in Chicago, which we hope will be reduplicated in cities across this country, for justice, not just for Trayvon Martin, but for the Trayvon Martins in every city across this country, for the Stephon Wattses and the Rekia Boyds, and all those people whose names we don't even know. We at least know Stephon Watts' name now, but they're... So please sign up for this. Please sign up on these sign-up sheets that are going around, and we'll start that work now. Before that, though, I'd like to invite Elisa Love, for the Justice for Howard Morgan, to please come and speak.
Thank you and good evening. Mrs. Robinson Morgan really wanted to be here this evening, but she had a family emergency, and she asked me to speak on behalf of the Free Howard Morgan campaign. The Morgan family, their prayers and support go out to all the families of victims of racism, corruption, and police brutality. Unfortunately, the difference between the Howard Morgan case and all the rest is that by God's grace, Howard Morgan is still alive after having been shot 28 times by Chicago police officers. And being alive for over 7 years now, he's suffered having to go through 2 court proceedings, and then the nerve of being convicted of attempted first-degree murder of officers who shot him. I mean, anyone who read any ounce of the case, it's absolutely ridiculous. Just as in listening to and reading anything about these other cases, it's ridiculous. And unfortunately, it is about race. It is about corruption. And the last words that Howard Morgan spoke on April 5th when he was convicted was, he said, "It's all in God's hands," you know, without trepidation or anything. But the thing about it is God works through people. And I think most of us as people, we've forgotten the power that we do have. And I think our government has forgotten that it, you know, the laws that it, you know, entrusts people to enforce, they only do that by the consent of the governed, which is our power. And if we hear these cases and listen to them and, you know, we become desensitized because there's so many, I mean, it'll just repeat. And it's like we're almost begging for anarchy and to go into a martial law police state, because at some point, you know, the pressure is going to be so great, something's going to happen. You know, we saw years ago what happened with Rodney King and people ready to burn the city down. I mean, there's only so much people can take. And, you know, back in the civil rights movement, you had several groups. You had Dr. Martin Luther King, God bless him, who wanted integration. You had the Nation of Islam, who were calling for separation of the races. You had Thurgood Marshall, who was holding up the law to the government's face, saying, look, the law works. Why don't we, you know, put in effect our own laws? You had the Black Panthers who, you know, had weapons or were like, you know, fight with, you know, what they're receiving, you know, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But, you know, really, what is it going to take for us to, you know, mobilize? We need to have an interfaith exchange. It's not about religion. We need to have a mobilization network, because, you know, it's not just the families that are here. Like Anton said, it's so many people we haven't even heard of that have no idea of what to do, because it's just shocking that something like that could happen to you. In regard to Howard Morgan, on April 5th, he was sentenced. All of the counts together came up to 125 years, but because he is due to serve the sentence concurrently and not consecutively, it's 40 years. But even at the age of 61, 40 years is ridiculous. He should not be serving one day. And his next court appearance is going to be on May 2nd. That's when the defense counsel is going to file a notice of appeal, a motion to reconsider the sentence, and also a motion for bail pending appeal, which was denied on the 5th, but Judge Crane allowed the motion to be entered again on May 2nd. I think the most ridiculous thing about the case of Howard Morgan is that he not only was a Chicago police officer for over 8 years, but then he was also a police officer for the Burlington Northern Pacific Railroad. And for those who don't know the difference, if you're working for the city, you have like municipal jurisdiction for city. If you work for the railroad, you have federal jurisdiction, which just like federal government, it supersedes the smaller jurisdictions. So he had federal jurisdiction because the railroad crosses state lines. So here's a man, and he worked for the railroad for over 13 years. So here's a man with all this experience, okay, a police officer, has never been arrested, does not have a criminal record. And all of a sudden, one night, a block away from his house, he's just going to flip out and go crazy and try to murder 4 officers. I don't think so. What's more likely to believe that 4 rookie, maybe even racist cops who have a fear of being in a black neighborhood, because all of them had 2 years or less experience approximately, you know, just overreacted. And, you know, the duty of a police, and my father's a retired police officer, by the way. The job of an officer is not only necessary, but it's an honorable one. And you do have good officers, but it's the bad ones that we're talking about. And even for the good ones, you're not so good if you don't speak up about what you see that's bad. And, you know, the duty of a police officer is to detain and apprehend where necessary, where you perceive or have reason to believe that a crime is taking place. And you do not draw your weapon to use deadly force unless there's reason to. And if you draw your weapon, it should be to use it. The police officers in the Howard Morgan case,
They unholstered their weapons before they even spoke to the man. Look at the transcripts. Why are you unholstering your weapons? You haven't even spoken to the man. And in all the other cases with Rekia Boyd, you don't even shoot into a crowd. What insane person is going to shoot into a crowd and then you're a trained officer and you can't even hit your target? It's insanity, and he shouldn't be walking around. He should be arrested. And the things that really make me angry is that, in the Howard Morgan case, in their civil case, it's been filed that the charges against them in the civil case is that they used excessive force. They should be being charged with murder, attempted murder. I mean, because that's what that is. If you draw your weapon to use deadly force and you're shooting at a person, with the intent to kill, that's attempted murder. So they should be charged with the same thing. But, in regard to the law and us as people, I really feel like we should be more knowledgeable about the law. And it's fine to march, and, we shouldn't just be moved when we hear something on TV, because a lot of times, no offense to Channel 9 or the stations, but they don't even want to show things unless it's, of some great heightened magnitude, or, just like in the Howard Morgan case, we were calling stations, all types of media. They didn't even want to cover the story until he was sentenced. I mean, you weren't even interested in the story until he's about to be sentenced. I mean, that's ridiculous, but be knowledgeable. Know what's going on. And then, do some simple things like write a letter, write to the governor, write to your, public officials. Hold them accountable for the positions that they're in. I went to the Judicial Inquiry Board. I made a complaint against the judge. And I didn't have any problems doing that because from what I witnessed of just the way the proceedings were held, there were a lot of things that were wrong. So, I mean, we do have power as people, to do more than march. We can write letters. We can, really look into matters and pay attention to detail and point out things that are wrong. There was a professor at the University of Chicago at Illinois, Professor Simpson. He did some extensive research, and it's called Chicago and Illinois Leading the Pack in Corruption. He determined that Chicago is the most corrupt city in our nation, and that the state of Illinois is the third most corrupt state in our nation. So what does that tell you? The Office of Professional Standards, who are supposed to keep the police in check, they had to change their name to the IPRA because of so much corruption. But changing the name doesn't mean they've changed their practices. And I mean, until we hold people accountable for their positions and, we let them know that everybody's accountable to someone and we as people do have power, that, these things will continue to go on. And I pray that not just the families here, but the people that we don't know about and the people who are, silent tonight and silently suffering, that they will have some relief and they will know some measure of justice. Thank you.
I think the federal government, the state of Florida, the town of Sanford, I'm sure want to uphold the arrest of George Zimmerman and charging him with second-degree murder as an exoneration of the system itself. To basically say that, an investigation ran its course, justice has been served so far, no need to worry, no need to keep protesting. The trial will be a year from now, so they won't have a court case mucking up the election come November. Everybody go home and be quiet. But there are other truths that we do know. One is that if not for protests, none of this would be happening in the first place. So in that sense, protest matters. We also know that the outpouring of tens of thousands of people around the country in the last several weeks to protest this lynching was not because this was an extraordinary case that people could not fathom, could not believe, but actually because it was so familiar for, especially in African American communities, that a youngster could be killed for no other reason than what he looked like and possibly what he was wearing. And that we also know that the arrest of George Zimmerman is not the arrest of a system that produced the racism that killed Trayvon, Rekia, Stephon, and put Howard Morgan in jail. But as people have said, that there are so many other people that we do not know. Here are some of them. Ayanna Stanley Jones, African American, 7 years old, unarmed, shot and killed by Detroit police, 2001. Ramarley Graham, African American, 18 years old, unarmed, shot and killed by the New York City Police Department in front of his grandmother and 6-year-old brother, 2012. Kendrick McDade, African American, 19, unarmed, shot and killed by the police in Pasadena, California, 2012. Sharon Jackson, African American, 21, unarmed, shot and killed by Baltimore police on March 21st. George Wales, African American, 29, unarmed, shot and killed by Baltimore police on March 26, 2012. Dante Price, African American, 25, unarmed, shot 22 times by 2 white security guards while he sat in his car in Dayton, Ohio, 2012. Manuel Loggins, African American, 31, unarmed, shot and killed by police while sitting in his SUV with his 14 and 9-year-old daughter. Raymond Allen, African American, 34, unarmed, father of 3, tasered twice by Galveston police with more than 50,000 volts of electricity, hogtied, and died 2 days later. Kenneth Chamberlain, African American, 68, unarmed, shot and killed by Mount Vernon police in 2012. And the list goes on and on. Anton said at the beginning that since January, 29 African Americans have been killed by police or security or someone affiliated with the state. That is incorrect. 29 African Americans have been killed since Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman in February. And so someone asked me a few days ago if I thought that the police killings and brutality were worse this year than in others. I don't know, because police violence is a permanent feature in black communities. But I do know that in Chicago last August, the police had already shot 43 people, killing 16. 83% of those who were shot by the police were African American. In an 8-month span in 2011, the Miami police killed 7 African American men. From 1998 to 2008, in North Carolina, police killed 16 African Americans. In 2003, Las Vegas police killed 10 African Americans. So we don't really know if this year is worse or not, but what we do know is that violence from the police, brutality from the police, is always the most visible edge of racism and inequality in the United States. And every once in a while, a particularly outrageous case of racism and brutality rips the mask off the system to expose the evil being done in black communities by these institutions every day. Whether it was Oscar Grant, who was shot in the back in Oakland on a subway platform, whether it was Sean Bell, who was shot more than 50 times by the New York's police department, whether it was Amadou Diallo, who was shot 41 times by the New York police. In Chicago, whether it was LaTanya Haggerty or Robert Russ, 2 young black people killed within hours of each other by the police in 1999, or whether it was Rodney King in 1992 in Los Angeles. In 1955, Emmett Till's murder ripped the mask off the fake claims of American democracy in the same way that Trayvon Martin's murder today is having a similar impact. And again, it's not because this case is special. He wasn't special. This was a black kid who was shot in the chest, who was marked as a John Doe and left in a morgue where the police made not even a single attempt to identify who he was. So this was not special, but the gross injustice done to this boy has shone a light on the everyday practices of racism, official corruption, and brutality that exist in black communities at the hands of the police and the courts every single day. Tens of thousands of people have been mobilizing into action to take stand against this. The stereotypes of black youth that are generated from officially sanctioned racial profiling, from the overrepresentation of young black people in the criminal justice system because of racism and corruption among the police and in the courts, has created the conditions under which something like the murder of Trayvon Martin and the murder of so many others could happen in the first place. And while it is not obvious, while not the obvious racism of the Jim Crow era that Emmett Till was killed in, the so-called age of colorblindness in the United States still produces steep disparities in the experiences of black and white people in this country. In the racial politics of the United States, we are led to believe, and this is what politicians talk about, but also in terms of the mass media, that unless someone is burning a cross or chanting nigger, that racism is not involved. But racism does not require name-calling or cross-burning in this country. I need some water. Sorry. Racism doesn't require name-calling or cross-burning in this country. When the Chicago Board of Education approves black schools for less funding and those schools fail, our children are labeled as bad students who don't care about education. And then the board uses that as a justification to shut down our schools, as they're doing across the south and west side of the city. That is racism. When employers are twice as likely to call back applicants with white-sounding names than they are to call back people with black-sounding names, or when white men with criminal records are twice as likely to be called back about a job than black men with no record at all. And that is a reason that contributes to the disproportionate levels of unemployment in black communities. They don't talk about it like that. We're lazy. We want handouts. We don't want to work. That is racism. And in Chicago in 2010, the police arrest over 20,000 black teenagers under the age of 18 compared to the arrest of only 975 white teenagers under the 18. It's not because black children commit more crime. It's because black communities are targeted by the police. When the New York City Police Department has a policy called stop and frisk, it is a policy called stop and frisk. You talk about changing the laws. What do you do when racism is the law? This is a policy that gives them the right to stop you if they think that you look suspicious. Well, in 2011, they stopped almost 800,000 people, 84% who are black and Latino. In almost none of these cases do they find any evidence of anything wrong at all. But in almost all of these cases, they are stopping black and Latino men, frisking them, questioning about where they are and where they are supposed to do, and they call that police work. When we know that it's racial profiling, and it's institutionalized racial profiling, and it's racism, regardless of what it is that they call it. And collectively, and you could add 1,000 different other statistics, numbers that fill this picture out. Collectively, these everyday experiences combine to convey a message to society at large that blacks are irresponsible, lazy, potentially criminal, and in some cases, worthy of death. And so how else do you explain the situation in which Rekia Boyd was killed? Can anyone here imagine an off-duty cop going into Wrigleyville after a Cubs game, complaining about the noise, pulling their gun out, shooting off 10 to 20 rounds, hitting a white woman in the head, and still being able to go back to his bed at night and being assigned to light desk duty in the following week? That is an impossibility, because clearly there are two standards of justice in this country. One for the society at large, and then one for the rest of us, that leads to black people being 13% of the population in this country, but more than half of the people who make up the imprisoned. And that is with a black president sitting in the White House, which we have to say has done very little to change the inequality, racism, and discrimination that remains at the heart of American society. And in some ways, we have to say that this panel, if anyone here believed it, because it's partly a media concoction, but that this panel exposes any lie that exists about America being a post-racial society. Howard Morgan was shot 28 times because he is black. Stephon Watts was killed by the police because he was black. Rekia Boyd was killed by the police because she was black, and Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman because he was black. And so George Zimmerman, who has finally been arrested, may have pulled the trigger. But 250 years of legal racial slavery, 100 years of legalized discrimination when slavery ended under a system called Jim Crow, and 40 years of institutionalized so-called colorblind racism is what provided the gun and cocked it in the first place. And that racism that pervades this society is not just a product of a pathological hatred for black people, even though it certainly can feel like it sometimes. But it is really central to maintaining the inequality that the Occupy movement has done so well to highlight over the last several months. That we live in a country that is racked by economic and social inequality, and one of the ways in which the so-called 1% are able to hold on to that power is by dividing the rest of us against each other. So they have us thinking that in the worst economic crisis in the last 70 or 80 years, in which the banks got away with everything, they have us believing that it's undocumented Mexicans who are the problem. They have us believing that it's the Chinese somewhere in China who are ruining the world economy. They want us to believe that it's the potential black criminal out there that is the real problem. They want us to believe that it's the Muslim terrorist who is just waiting to blow up something in the United States that is the real problem. It is always anyone but the rich white men who run this country and who own the banks. And it's not just the racism that they use here. We have to see this as linked to the racism that the people who run this country use to dominate the rest of the world as well, for war, for empire, and the exploitation and oppression of people abroad. We are constantly inundated with racist explanations of why illegal Mexicans are in this country without ever having to ask the question of what it means to be in a country that has been economically exploited and dominated by the United States for 200 years. The U.S. uses Islamophobia and the demonization of Arabs and Muslims to justify bombing the hell out of those countries. They use the lie of all Muslims being terrorists to justify an internal regime of racial profiling and illegal detentions. And in the post-9/11 era, militarized police forces, racial profiling, and creeping restrictions on free speech and the right to assemble have come together to limit the protests and opposition to the economic and political priorities of the 1%. We have to stand up to that. In that sense, racism is really the linchpin to the functioning of the United States, both at home and abroad, and it must be confronted. In closing, we're at a turning point, not only in this country, but internationally as well. What kind of world do we want to live in? Can we continue to live in a world that is dominated by the rich and powerful to the detriment to the rest of us? But also a world that sees 5 African Americans mowed down in Tulsa, More than 24 black men killed by the police since Trayvon was killed. The murder of Shalma al-Wawdi, a Muslim woman in a hijab, beaten to death with a tire iron in Southern California with a note left near her body telling her to go back to her country of Iraq, the country that was destroyed by the United States for 10 years of war and bombing. That is a world that we can no longer tolerate. No more racism at home and no more racism abroad. We will fight for justice for Trayvon because just arresting this white racist is not justice in and of itself. And we will fight like hell for Rekia, for Howard, and for Stephon and Shima as well. I want to end with a quote from Frederick Douglass, a black freedom fighter and abolitionist who risked his life in the struggle to end slavery in America because I think it's relevant today. The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions have been born of earnest struggle. The conflict has been exciting, agitating, all-absorbing. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both, moral and physical. But it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. We have taken too much. Enough is enough. Join the struggle to fight against racism, police brutality, and fight for a different world. Thank you.